Okay, so I'll just introduce myself. So I'm Brookes-smith, Associate Director of Public Health at Warwickshire North CCG, covering Warwickshire County Council. Do you want to introduce yourself?
I'm Amanda Smith, Head Teacher of Poole Grammar School.
Okay, great. And obviously you've been one of the sort of pilot sites that have led on LFT testing, and your name's shown obviously in the handy handbook that we now have. So hence why I grabbed you in the hope to do some of these questions. Okay, so I'll jump straight into it then. So the first question is obviously storage for LFTs. Where do you store your LFTs?
So we store ours inside a building. So they need to be kept at an ambient temperature. So to be honest with you, we just tend to store them in a main building somewhere, because we do our testing in a room that's called our pavilion. It sounds all very grand, but basically it's like a shed on the school field, which is cold. So we don't store the LFTs there. We store them in the main school building overnight, just locked away. We tend to store the PPE and all the sundry things that go with it in our pavilion, because that doesn't need to, as long as it's locked and students can't access it, it doesn't need any particular storage. But the LFTs, we store inside a building.
Great. And then, okay, this is a big one, staffing. How have you staffed your LFTs, and where did you get your staff from, and were DBS checks an issue, or anything that you've gone through in staffing?
Okay, so when we first started, what we did, and I know the other pilot schools did the same, is I put an email out to all my staff to say, would anybody like to be involved? And of course, people don't really know what they're signing up to start with. So I started on a very small scale. Now, we were very fortunate because we had Public Health England who were able to come in and support us and help us to develop our systems. But nevertheless, I would still do the same again. And I've done exactly the same again this morning, actually, is email all my staff to say, if you'd like to be involved in whatever capacity, then great. If you have been involved and you've decided, actually, I don't feel very comfortable with this anymore, then that's okay too. So we've been able to staff it properly, really, internally. Now, there are obviously issues here. In terms of other people's workload. What my starting point was I started with our first aiders, because they were perhaps the people who were more comfortable to do any sort of clinical work of any description. Then once the staff started to get a bit more comfortable with it, other people came in. So for example, my exams officer, she's been heavily involved. She's brilliant at being really super organised, but I'm aware that we've got mock exams in 2 weeks' time. So at that point, she will pull away from that. So I have created quite a big team within my staff body, and I think what is really important is to have consistency in that team. So I've appointed, that's a strong word, but I've got one person who's my kind of clinical lead, as it were. Now, she happens to be one of our HTLAs, and she effectively organises the day-to-day running of how the COVID testing happens. I've got one other person who is our administrator. Now, I'm actually moving who that is after Christmas, but somebody who takes control of all the consent, takes control of who's actually attending each day, because of course somebody might have consent and you plan to test them, then they're off ill or they've got a doctor's appointment or something like that. So somebody separately, completely, who manages that administrative process. And I think those are two absolutely critical roles. The other roles so you have your swabbers, and some people are comfortable with swabbing and some people are not comfortable with swabbing. Now, as I understand it, the national rollout is going to be student self-swabbing anyway.
It is, yes.
But the person who's going to be kind of overseeing that and supervising that, that's a particular role, sort of supervising the self-swabbing. And then you have the processors who are behind, and then the people who are looking at the LFTs behind as well. Now, those people, in terms of the kind of the back room, as it were, they, because of the GDPR situation, they don't know what the identity is of the young person. So it's important, if you're going to get somebody in who is not of your school staff, that they can't connect the individual with the LFT barcode. Now, I forgot to say also, one other critical role is the person who's at the entrance of your testing room will have, for us, the spreadsheet, paper spreadsheet of child, date of birth, consent given by, contact details, will have, and then they will put the sticker, the barcode sticker, onto their spreadsheet. And that doesn't have any kind of clinical role, but they need to be somebody who's obviously a member of your staff.
Yes.
Because they're the person who can connect the barcode with the individual child.
Yes. Okay, so far you've been able to do quite well with mostly like majority staff.
Yeah,
If you did need to go out to volunteers out in like where,
yeah.
who would you think you'd go to
Well,
first?
I've gone first of all to my governors. So
Yes.
I've emailed all my governors this morning to say, is anybody prepared to give any time? And what I emailed my chair of governors, who happens to be a clinician actually, and he said, you know, I'm happy to come in and help. But what he said, it would be really useful to know what the window of time is that you would need people to commit to, which is a fair point. So what I've said is that, I mean, our school day starts at 8:35. But I want, you know, the kind of getting set up in the morning takes 20 minutes or so. So I said basically between 8 a.m. and 11 a.m. if somebody can give a window of that time. Then, so I've gone to my governors. I have had a few parent volunteers, and at the moment I've put them on hold slightly because of the DBS situation. Because
Yes.
obviously we would need to have those people DBS checked. Now, one of the parents who's volunteered is a staff nurse in the hospital. Some people may have the DBS
Already.
I can't remember what it's called when you can transfer from one institution to another.
Yes.
So they may
So the
have that.
passport thing, yes.
That's right. They may have that, but I think we have to work on the assumption they don't. I will go out to my parent body if I need to, but I think what I would, from our experience, what's really important there is that you don't have 50 people who come in and do maybe a day once every 3 weeks, because
Yes.
if you have a more consistent team, then they get better and better and better and more efficient at doing
Yes.
that particular role.
That's a good point.
So,
And so how does your day go? How does the day go? So when do you start your testing and when do you generally finish your testing, and how many people get through that when you do it?
So it all depends on what you're doing. So let's say we've got our key worker children who are coming in as of tomorrow. So we will have around 150 children in school tomorrow across all year groups, and we will have them in their bubble rooms at the start of the day. Now, what we're going to do for tomorrow is put them into their bubble rooms. So let's say we've got 40 year sevens who are going to be in across 2 rooms. We'll get them set up there, get them started on their learning and get their day going. And then we will go and take them a bubble at a time down to our pavilion, get them socially distanced, lined up with their masks on. Obviously, you need to check that they've got consent as well already, and then process them through. Now, in terms of the swabbing, simply because we've had experience and we've had the time to do it, we can probably get through, let's say those 40, we'll get through those in 15 minutes or so.
Right.
It won't take long at all, and that's with 2 swabbers. Because
so before Christmas, when you were doing it as your initial pilots, which years were you doing initially as part of the pilot, and how long was that taking you in the morning?
Okay, so stepping back a little bit, when we first did it, we did the whole school across a 3-day period, and that took 3 full days to do it.
Oh,
so
wow, okay.
that's when we were learning, and we didn't, you know, it was, we did, I mean, I'm aware that people know that we had support from the military, but to be fair, the military at the time, they were new to this as well, so we were all learning effectively as we went at the time. Subsequently, we did the whole school. Once we'd worked out how to do this, subsequently we did the whole school in 1 day on 1 occasion. Now that was a massive job, and actually I wouldn't do that again. Subsequent to that, we then tend to do a year group at a time. So we had a cluster of cases before Christmas in our year 11, which meant that what we decided to do was to test our year 11 every single day. So the whole of year 11, it was 180 children every single day. And that would take us, we'd get them in the morning. So our day runs as follows. They would come in the morning, they would go straight to the pavilion. We would get them through a tutor group at a time, and they would then go to our main hall and be sat in our main hall doing independent work for an hour or so, because getting them through the swabbing is really quick. You can get through 180 students, you can get through in an hour or so. But what happens then, it takes time for the processing to happen, because although the LFT takes 30 minutes, there's the practicalities of, I don't know if you've seen these devices yet, but you then got to put it into the tube. You've got to squish it around 10 seconds. You've got to then, the kind of mechanics of doing that takes time. So we would put our students then back into the main hall to do some independent work in their bubbles with their masks on, social distance, until such time as we said, right, they're clear, and then we allow them back into the school community again. And the reason we did that is because we were doing serial contact tracing as well. So we had serial, we were making sure that they were clear before they interacted with the school community.
Yes.
Now, I think going forward, what we will do when our year 11s and 13s come back next week is exactly the same thing again. But probably what we'll do is we'll put them into their tutor groups in the morning.
Yes.
We'll take them out to tutor groups at a time.
Yes.
Test them, put them back into their tutor room again until the results are out, and then we'll let the day start. So what we intend to do is to collapse our timetable at the start of the day next Monday, so that they're not suddenly going from their tutor room into 15 different lessons, and therefore potentially risking that sort of spread.
Yes.
We're keeping them tight on that morning so that then we can test them all, and if a tutor group is clear, they're clear. If the whole year group's clear, the day carries on as it normally does. And if not, we can set up the kind of contact tracing and get the children off site who have turned positive if they've turned positive.
Yeah. So previously, what you did was you tested them and you had them all sat in a hall, in organised seats where you knew who the close contacts were, and then going forward, you're going to do it by group sessions and delay the morning really until that you've had that all clear.
And I think we'll do that for next week and the week after.
Yes.
So we do the whole school screen, as it were.
Yes.
And then subsequent to that, we'll go back to our old model where we'll put them into the hall when we're just doing close contacts and serial screening, because I know different schools have got different sort of facilities in terms of capacity.
Yes.
That's a model that worked for us. And I know another one of the pilot schools, they haven't got the capacity in their school. And they are using the model I've just described.
Yes, sounds good.
As a kind of routine thing, as it were.
Yeah. So when people were found positive, how did that work? Talk me through that. So when you had a child in the hall, or obviously going forward when you had them in the tutor groups, when they're found positive, what would be your process, or what was your process?
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky. That's a tricky part, because of course, as soon as I walk into the hall, everyone looks at me thinking, oh dear, what's going to happen now? Not quite often, but sometimes, of course, and they did understand this. It was because there was a kit failure, or because the result wasn't clear. So one of us would go and gently kind of find the student, say, look, we just need to retest you again. I mean, sometimes it was very clear that it was going to be positive, but we would do a retest, so a second LFT test on them. We then keep them. We've got an outdoor space, a covered space at the pavilion, where we would just keep them until that result came through. So they were then separated from everybody. We tend to keep a member of the pastoral staff nearby, obviously, just to kind of look after their welfare as well. Now we're in a slightly different position than other people, and I recognise this, that because our staff have been trained by PHE to do the PCR swab, which requires a different set of PPE. So then we would do the PCR swab, and then that would be sent off to PHE, and obviously, whilst all of this is happening, somebody else is phoning the parents to say, come and collect them, please.
Yes. Yeah.
And to be honest, that in all of our experience, that has never been a problem. And bear in mind that we get 60% of our young people come on school buses from massively wide areas. We've never had an issue in terms of people collecting their child from school.
Oh, so that was going to be my question then, because obviously we have a large number of buses in Warwickshire, which is probably more than, and similar to you, more than most other areas. And so we have a lot of children who travel in together. So would you then recognise the bus as close contacts as well, if they've travelled in on the bus?
So the experience that we have, I mean, I'm sure most schools are the same. We put them in bubbles on the buses, so we would expect them. I recognise that isn't a perfect system, but
we have that as well. That's how we do it we have seating plans on buses where we can, but there are some private providers in which we aren't able to do that. But yeah, it's so in the majority of cases we'd hope to have them bubbled.
That's right.
Or grouped.
So what we would do is then, in the conversation with the child about, or you may have seating plans that allow you to do that more easily. In terms of the close contacts, we'd obviously look at the teaching room and the zone, as it were, around the child. We would also look at the bus, people who they knew that they were in close contact with on the bus, people they sat beside, in front and behind, so that kind of zone around them. But in terms of the whole bus, No, we didn't. We wouldn't then kind of say, right, we're going to isolate the whole bus. It would just be those close contacts.
That's good.
The other part of it is that we get the children to think really carefully about who they spent their breaks and lunch times with. Now, for the older ones, this worked really quite well because they tend to fall, in our school, they tend to fall into two categories. I'm sure it's the same in most. They're either the social butterflies who then interact with everybody in their entire tutor group, or they're the ones who sit quietly on their phone or on their reading a book or doing, they have a very close-knit group of friends. So we do that on a very bespoke basis, just to depending on what that child was. And the head of year would always have a very good idea as to what the nature of the child was. With the little ones, year 7 and 8, because they are taught in bubble rooms, so the way that we've done it, and I'm sure many schools are the same, is that Key Stage 3 are taught in their bubble rooms and they're with each other all day, every day. So we took the decision, particularly laterally, that if they were in a tutor group, then actually that whole tutor group were the bubble.
Yeah.
But it tended to be for the older ones because they were taught in different ways.
Yes.
Then we were able to be a bit more nuanced about who we needed to send home or who we needed to identify as close contacts. We'd also, of course, ask the staff directly if they felt that they were a close contact as well. And as much as for anything for reassurance, we tended to test the staff regularly who were potentially those close contacts. And that was either through self-swabbing or through the testing in school as well.
Oh, and just to touch on that point then, so any staff that were working as like the test centre people, were they additionally LFT'd as a result of that? Or was there anything you did additionally for them?
That's a good point, actually. So with them, as part of their training, we got them to test each other for starters, but then at the start of every session, we would get them to test, that's the plan going forward, is that we test them all at the beginning of every testing session so that they could know at the beginning that they were not positive on that day. And by the way, we've had quite a lot of positive cases and none of our testers have tested positive at any point.
That's brilliant.
So the PPE works, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant.
So that's reassuring, I think.
And actually, while we're on that theme, I'll jump back to the theme of the testing process. But how were your staff trained? What process did they go through to? Because obviously we've got carers that still don't seem to wear their PPE as well as they could or should. So how is it that they were trained on their PPE to get that level of coverage so that you haven't had any cases in the testers? We
were trained by PHE, but then my people who are now our kind of confident people, they have rolled out of that training to other people. So I haven't been able to see the training that's online, but essentially I think they just need to be encouraged that this is okay, that they wear the blue face mask, which I think has been supplied to all the schools. They wear gloves, they wear a visor, they wear an apron, and that if one of them is kind of spots that the other one hasn't got it on properly, or if it's not, or then they kind of look out for each other as well. So there's that. Yeah. When you go into the room now, everyone looks the part. They look the part because there's that kind of expectation. I'm just going to quickly see if I can show you a picture actually.
Yeah, no worries.
So in terms of that
part, so don't worry, because we'd need consent of the person on the picture anyway, because if I share this widely, I don't. Yeah. But
by the way, but anyway.
No, it's fine. But yeah, so that sounds good. So they've had lots of training, and then it's that hand-me-down training and that auditing of each other. I think is you're right. That's really, really important. So going back to the testing process, have there been many pupils that refuse to test themselves, or the parents refuse to test on their behalf, or vice versa, whereby the child wants it, but the parents don't, the parents want it, but the child doesn't? How have you dealt with anyone who's refused or been unable to test?
Okay, so we were very fortunate. We had a very strong uptake initially. So we had about 75% uptake of consent in the first instance. At that time, I mean, bear in mind this was obviously brand new, so we were not sure how this was going to go with the parents. We've got a school of 1,200, and I think I probably had less than a dozen emails from parents saying, querying it, and only one or two who were really not very happy with the idea at all. But from our perspective, it was those unhappiness was more about them not necessarily trusting it. and wanting to understand the science behind it. Now, all of that got sorted out, and everyone, once you were able to speak to parents, actually, they have a very good understanding of it. And our consent rate, it dipped a little bit, but then it came back up again. And at the moment, I think we're running at about 80% consent. So we haven't really had any issues with that at all. I think there were times when it was just before the half-term holiday when parents started to realise that it might impact on whether they were able to go on holiday or not. But I think, to be honest, we're in a very different place than that right now.
So how long have you been doing this for? So was it before half term that you started LFT testing? Wow, okay.
22nd of October was our first session. Now, in terms of kind of difference of opinion between parent and child, we've had very few issues with that at all. Obviously, over 16-year-olds can consent themselves anyway, and that hasn't caused us any issues at all, actually. We've never had an over 16 child whose parent is adamant that they're not prepared to, so we've not had to fight that battle at all. What we do, though, is that any consent that's given from a parent, if the child turns up at the reception, part of the process, we do an identity check and do a final check with them. Are you happy to go ahead with this? And if they can have a wobble, because wobbles do happen, then somebody will take them to one side and try and talk them through about why they're having a wobble. And if they don't want to do it, they don't do it. So we'd never force anybody to do it, but we might then subsequently have a parent conversation to explain it. And then again, just prior to the swab, part of the process that we go through is, do you understand why you're doing this? Do you know what this is all about? Are you happy to go ahead? So we kind of have a sort of multiple steps in the process to make sure that we've got consent and it's informed and it's understood. And that's worked really well, actually. And you know, our year 11s now just kind of rumble up and they just get swabbed and off they go. It's become part and parcel of daily life. And
so the 20% that don't get tested, then do they just do they just carry on? And have there been any situations whereby you've had to ask anyone to remain at home because they don't want to get tested? Because there is the new guidance that says if you're a close contact, you need to be at home if you don't get tested every day.
And there have been. So the way that we have written our letter is to say you've been identified as a close contact. You've got one of two choices. You either test every day and come in, or you stay at home, and that's your choice. So because what I didn't want to do was to make them feel bullied into it either. It has to be really genuine consent. And there are times when families may make the decision that yes, they want to stay at home, maybe because they've got a vulnerable person at home. So we've had some students who have decided to stay at home, and we've kind of said that's okay, and we understand that, and we're not going to put you under any pressure to sort of change your mind about that at all. What we found over time is that some parents have then said, actually, no, they're missing out too much on education. Let's get them in. So that kind of the mind changing thing is a little bit of an issue that just needs. That's why you need a very, very good administrator to kind of administer the consent process so that they're really on top of that at every step of the process, really.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, so going on to the recording of the tests. So obviously you prepare, as you just mentioned, the list of all the people as they come through. You've got like a runner who checks everyone and then sticks the barcode as they come through. They then go into the LFT testing process, which we'll cover in a minute. But when you get the results, how are your results recorded? And how so far have you been expected to report them?
Okay, so I understand the national process is that even negative results need to be reported. So what we have done is that we have got ours all on a physical spreadsheet on a paper, because we don't have internet access in our pavilion. So we've got the idea of having this all digitally. I think there are two problems with it. What, in my view, one is that you've got an input risk error because the LFT codes are quite long, so you've got an input risk error. But also, we don't have that capacity to do that digitally in our facilities. So, sorry, what was the question again?
So how do you report them? So obviously it sounds like, because they did mention today actually to get a barcode scanner if you can. So obviously you've been manually putting them in the numbers of the barcodes. So you stick the sticker on the notes and then they do the LFT test, and then so you manually put on the same sheet the results.
So we manually write on the sheet the result, and then what we were doing is that we would then obviously contact the parents to say that the LFT has come back as positive, but this needs a confirmatory PCR result. Now,
yes.
the way that ours were reported back then was that the PCR result the PCR test would go to public health,
Yes.
be entered into the track and trace system centrally by them, and then
Yes.
that would then go to the parents as the confirmatory result. Now we were then informed as well, but
Yes.
it would automatically enter in the track and trace system. But we, indeed, the consent form that's online at the moment, and it might well have been updated, is that we said from the beginning we would not report negative results.
Okay.
So there was no requirement for us to report negative results at all.
So how did you report your positives into PHE? Once you had on that piece of paper, what was the process then to report them into PHE or any local monitoring systems?
Well, so there were two parts to this process. I would basically contact my contacts at PHE,
yes.
saying, "Oh, we've got a positive, and that one's on its way to Porton for you to process now." We just have a conversation about that. But then on a daily basis, I would then email my local public health Dorset team,
yes.
to give them an update of. But I tended to do that at the end of when I had the confirmatory PCR result.
Yes.
Because occasionally, the weak positives on the LFT didn't convert into positives on the PCR, and that's all about infectivity, and the rate of infectivity. So I would tend to wait until I had a confirmatory PCR before telling the local public health teams, and then I'd assure them that I've got advice from Public Health England. This is what we were going to do. This was the plan, and that's worked really well. And so I've kind of kept the local teams fully informed about what's going on with the Public Health England teams as well.
Okay, so from your point of view then, when it came to the tests, actually most of the tests, when they say they were positive. It's just when you had that sort of ones that look a little bit inconclusive, when those were sent off, those were generally the ones that they looked a bit strange when you had them. You sent them to get PCR'd, and those were the ones that were negative, but actually the positives were generally always positive.
Yeah, they were.
Which is our main concern, I think, is the positive testing of the, because we hear obviously about false positives, but actually what you're saying is it's more like you get a positive avoided result, and then you get a negative, and actually the false positives isn't as big as an issue.
No, that's right. For us, it really wasn't an issue, and I talked at quite some length with the scientists about this, about the numbers involved with this. And certainly from the experience we've had, I mean, we've done thousands of tests now over this period of time, and the number of false positives are very, very small. But also the reassurance and the way to kind of, this is just my personal view, and this is what we did, was to do a test. If it was a hint of a positive and it didn't look right, we'd do another one anyway.
Yes.
And then, as out of an abundance of caution, we sent that child home to isolate pending the PCR result anyway. And very, very occasionally, when it turned out it wasn't a false positive, it was a false positive rather, and in fact there wasn't a result, they'd be back in school the next day.
Yeah. And that's the hope, the process. I mean, we're having a few delays around processing of PCRs in Warwickshire currently, and I think it's a regional issue really. But yeah, that'd be quite interesting to know. But like what you're saying is it's a very small number, and some of the math that we've done at the minute shows that we're going to have a very, very small number compared to the number of kids going through the tests. And in fact, it'd be probably a handful from an entire school, which would be really interesting. Okay, so let's now go through some of the nitty-gritties of setting it up. So everyone keeps talking about the famous word, which is the flooring and the non-porous flooring. So and then we're having massive issues, I think, about and discussions around the how you set up the bays, because on the conference call today they've said the expectation is around social distancing, but obviously in the photographs of all the bays you see and on the LFT sites, they've got quite clear perspex, bays set up, or at least plastic sheeting. So please explain to us how you've set up your bay system, and how you've gone about that, and your flooring, how you've overcome the porous flooring problem.
Well, this porous flooring problem was a novelty to me. Basically, I think it means just don't have a carpet. So if you've got somebody who vomits, or somebody who you've got COVID in the air. It's basically about cleaning mobility. So,
yes,
as I say, we've got this pavilion, which is a very grand way of saying a shed in the field.
yes,
It's just got a normal hard floor.
okay,
It's just got a normal hard floor. We also do not have dividers between our bays at all.
oh, okay,
We've never. So the way that we've got a one-way system in, so the boys line up outside for start.
yes,
So they don't enter the building until they're ready. And whether it's wet or cold or dry or hot, it doesn't matter. We just say, well, that's just what you're going to have to do. They then come in one at a time, and this is when we're doing our kind of routine testing. We have 2 chairs set up so they're at least 2 meters apart from each other.
yes.
Where they sit down and they have their swab done. They will then walk through this pavilion and out the other side, out the exit, and back into wherever they're meant to be held. Everything is set up so that the chairs that the young people sit on are 2 meters from each other, but also at least 2 meters from where the testing setup is, as it were,
Yes.
where all the tables are and everything like that. And they come in their masks. They take their masks off to do the test. They put the mask back on, and then they leave the building.
So how many bays did you say that you've got? So bays, but seatings that are 2 meters apart from each other. How many of those have you got?
So we take it is largely limited by staffing, but ordinarily we would have just 2 chairs.
Just 2. Okay, brilliant. And then you can get to a large number by yourself, like getting a swabber in rather than them swabbing themselves. That sounds brilliant.
And then sometimes if we've got a larger number, or we're a bit short of time, or it's very wet outside and we think we need to get them through more quickly, then we might put an additional chair in, or maybe even just one outside on the landing area, just outside the room, so that we can basically get the swab done. Well, actually, no, we didn't do the swabbing outside. We will get them sort of in the room, but as long as you can have 2 meters between them. And I can foresee, a situation where you might have a classroom that's dedicated to this, for example.
Yes.
And as long as the desks themselves are separated from each other, we have never had the need to have screens in between each of the.
Oh, so that's interesting. So it's saying that okay, yes, we need to protect the heating of the reagent and the temperature of the room that the reagent's processed in, but actually the swab where that's being carried out doesn't have a volume of temperature control. That is quite an interesting point. And obviously, apart from the potential gagging, vomiting issue, which not many people have experienced yet.
I'll tell you a little story about this actually, because when our very first testing, we did throat swabbing. So we're now doing nasal swabbing.
Okay, so that's both nostrils, like 5 turns.
Yeah. But when we did it on the first time we did it in October, when we did the whole school in 3 days, we did throat swabbing, and as part of the PPE that turned up and all the kit that turned up, we had 300 sick bowls arrived, and I said, "What on earth do we need 300 sick bowls for?" And they said, "Oh, in case of the gag reflex." And I thought, "Okay, fine." Anyway, we did 1,200 boys and 150 staff, and not a single one vomited. So I suppose there's a fear that it might be, and I might have just got lucky. But
yes,
but it certainly wasn't the issue that I expected it to be. Is what I'm saying.
That's a lot of bowls still. So
we've got plenty of bowls.
Oh, okay. So that's really interesting. So you were able to get through that really, really quickly. And obviously, will you move to a point where they self-swab, or did you find the swabbing process so much faster that actually that's the better way for you?
For us, I think we're happy with the staff doing the swabbing. I mean, if my staff starts to get uncomfortable with that, and we ended up with it being a staffing issue, then I would move to self-swabbing. The things that I think would need to be overcome for the self-swabbing is ensuring that the young people do a deep enough swab, for starters. Also to make sure that they get the right part of where they're meant to be swabbing. You'd also need mirrors to be set up, and I'm a bit conscious about the fact that there'll be touch points there. So I'm thinking if you were to do that, I might get my DT department to create a frame in which you can put a mirror so they're not holding the mirror, because otherwise you've got a touch point that somebody else is going to touch, or you're going to have to sanitize these things all of the time. So in an ideal, because I think that I read the guidance is that the student would then put the swab into the tube, is what I believe. And I just think there's obviously ways to overcome that, but for us personally, we're going to stick with the staff doing the swabbing because we can get them through really quickly, actually, to be honest.
Oh, definitely. So, if you know off the top of your head, how many staff do you have currently that sort of man your pavilion on a day, would you say?
Ordinarily about 6.
About 6.
Yeah, about 6, and over about an hour and a half, 2-hour period. So obviously that's a bit of an issue with teaching staff because they'll obviously ordinarily have to go off and teach. But there might be some times when, you know, if we've got an on-contact period in the morning, they're able to commit themselves to doing that in the morning. So about 6 is the standard, plus my administrator, who does the kind of running around and making sure that the right people are in the right place at the right time.
Okay, brilliant. And what about hand washing and sanitizing? Is that like a station on the way in? How is that done on site?
So we've got a hand sanitizer on the way in for the students, and then at the swabbing station, the person who's doing the swabbing will wear obviously their gloves, and then will sanitize their gloves between each child, and the routine is so that's on their tables, just ready to do that every single time. And then between each bubble, they will change their PPE. To get fresh PPE on between that, and then in the space in the pavilion, we're very fortunate. It happens to be hot water and soap and water there as well. So obviously the members of staff who are doing the processing and any members of staff in there, they will wash their hands with hot soap and water at the end of the process as well.
And do any staff need to get changed anywhere else or anything like that? Do they have any sort of
Yeah, interestingly, I remember very early on actually there was one of our members of staff. She arrived with and you know you weren't to know this until it happened, but she had kind of quite loose kind of blouse that she was wearing, and it was a bit of a nightmare. So we had to put elastic bands on her to stop them kind of dragging. So that was just a little bit of a learning curve really. But what we were told by PHE and what does happen is people just take off their excess jewellery, don't have loose clothing, so that it just reduces those kind of risk points, I suppose.
Yes.
So you're not having bracelets and watches and all of that sort of thing. And what they tend to do is put them into a Ziploc bag at the start of the session, put them to one side, and then obviously once they've washed their hands and they're happy, then get themselves back into their whatever they're wearing.
Yeah, that's no problem.
No change of clothes or anything like that, actually.
Oh no, I mean that makes total sense. So the last question I've got, so thank you so much for your time today, is that what would you say is the biggest issue you've had to come up with that you didn't expect, that, or any big tips that you've got for anyone that's just about to embark on this? So any big tips or big issues that you've had?
I think, I mean, tips I suppose is just take your time. I think don't rush at this actually. Because if you take your time and take your time to get it right, and you know what is it? Do it once, do it right, sort of thing. I think there was a temptation. We fell into the trap on our second day when we did our whole school testing. We were on a mission to test the whole school in one day, and you know that was our kind of mission to do that. Now we achieved it, but actually one of the things that we learned, and this is perhaps a tip, is that we ended up with some positive results just before the end of the day, which was a total nightmare because suddenly you've got to get these children before they get on the school bus and identify who they are. And so I think doing the testing in the morning is really important because then you're not worried about the rest of the day. And also they've not been roaming around the school for the whole day as well. So do them in the morning. I think, you know, as a head teacher who highly values the education of young people, I would say that don't worry too much about the fact that maybe lessons are disrupted a little bit because of this. Try and kind of accept that that's just one of the consequences, but we're doing it in order to keep young people in school. And what I would also say is that we have massively benefited from the serial screening. We had dozens and dozens of young people who were able to stay in school, who were close contacts, who serially tested negative, but they stayed in school for a period of time. So, you know, it's been I know it's a bit of an unnerving experience, but it's a really, really positive experience that I think be encouraged by that is what I would say.
Brilliant. That's great. That's everything I needed to hear, and I'm sure the teachers will love having this update, and I really do appreciate it.